19 MiG-27. Author, Wild Wolverine. Lin Huaisheng was spreading around outside the conference room. He was just an audience member at the just concluded discussion, but it still made him very uncomfortable. Some people seem to always wait for changes in the external environment, instead of doing something positive. These people see all opportunities as a trap, which is really unacceptable to him. Major General Su Jing suddenly came over. He didn't show up at the meeting that day, and he seemed to be on business. Listen to it, don't stubbornly insist on your own opinions, and don't easily let others think for yourself. Major General said. He seemed to know what Lin Huaisheng was thinking. Teacher, I will try my best to explain what I know. Very well, I will reveal some information. Researcher Gao's opinions only represent his own. Major General Su said softly. Obviously, although he was not present, he knew what the eloquent international strategy expert said. Oh. Your report has been delayed. Because of the latest intelligence, all the military airfields in northwestern India are preparing for battle, and the anti-aircraft missile units and early warning aircraft squadrons are also being mobilized every month. I haven't found that the army has to be mobilized for the time being. I guess it is very maybe today or tomorrow, India will launch a new round of aerial attacks. But the UN envoy is still. It's not a good time. When can you make progress? How did I teach you before? Right? Intelligence analysts should not jump to conclusions. Practice has proved that bad timing often has unique advantages. Maybe India thinks that choosing such a timing can paralyze Pakistan. But I don't think airstrikes can destroy Pakistan. I have seen Pakistani pilots, and I always feel that it is not so easy to defeat. In contrast, the Pakistani army is not so reassuring. Well, that's why the Air Force will send a delegation to study there. By the way, I heard from the Pakistani pilot that a delegation of the Air Force is now in Attock to communicate with the Pakistani 33rd Wing. I remember he said that the person in charge is called Songning. Not only for communication, Pakistan ordered a batch of J-10B aircraft last year for testing and handover there. Now the timing is very delicate, and the above decided to let our top pilots stay in Pakistan to see. Let us take a look at the real air combat and ground command. The Pakistani side has some valuable experience in the use of early warning aircraft. The use of early warning aircraft. Yes, we have been exploring the tactics of using early warning aircraft, but real combat and electronic simulation are not the same. Confrontation is different, especially the issue of command. Yeah, the pilot I saw was a colonel. Unless there is a major general on the AWACS aircraft, it's really difficult to handle. Lin Huaisheng said with a shrug. In the evening of this day, all the personnel at the frontline airports in India received a notice that they could not go out. The actual control lines that keep the pilots tied up. The start of the war, likely after the departure of United Nations personnel, is heartening news for the war-hungry Air Force. A few days ago, the news that 2 young pilots of the 24th Squadron were awarded the Warrior Wheel Medal for shooting down 2 Pakistani fighter jets made all the pilots on the Western Front feel unbearably restless. Most people felt that such an easy award was unfair, but everyone knows in their hearts that war is tantamount to the best stage for soldiers. Good news came one after another from the north. At noon, the Ministry of National Defense reported that the Trident Squadron had shot down an F-16. The report said that whether the aircraft belonged to the most powerful Falcon Squadron in Pakistan was still being verified. For many years, Pakistan's F-16 has been a haunting shadow of the Indian Air Force, but the 1-0 record in the morning, the military concealed the news of the downing of 3 MiG-21s, came in time, leaving some drivers behind. Pilots of the MiG-21 or MiG-27 felt that in the face of overwhelming numerical superiority, the Pakistan Air Force's F-16 was no longer an unshakable opponent. The 29th Squadron stationed in Jorbut is also planning an attack intensively. Everyone on the base has guessed that the rumor that the war will escalate is true. If it is just a small fight in the Kashmir region, it will never use the war zone far away from the northern war zone. 29 Squadron. The 8 MiG-27 UPGs lined up at the airport, surrounded by a large number of compressed air vehicles and power supply vehicles, are doing a very formal debugging of electronic equipment. When Captain Pundit was called into the conference room, it was already full of people talking to each other. At a glance, he saw that the huge mission blackboard was covered with aerial photos and small-scale military maps. In fact, the maps of the two are all of the same goal, which is at an airport on the edge of a big city. The mission name above the map is also covered with a pushpin on a blue paper with the word confidential written on it. The captain knew that the layout of the conference room was no different from the previous drills, but today's atmosphere was obviously different, so he found a corner and sat down, and then tried to recall the airport runway. The MiG-27 UPG of the 29th Squadron has been trained to drop anti-runway bombs for a long time. All the simulated attacks are carried out by the staff with the real runway on the map, so the captain can recognize most of the airport runways in Pakistan and Western China. It can be seen that this is a civilian airport, with a wide runway and apron, as well as a large-scale terminal. However, in Pakistan, many airports do not distinguish between military and civilian. The captain finally remembered that this should be Lahore's international airport, and he couldn't help but gasp, not because the target was far from the conflict zone in the north, and the expansion of the conflict was not what he expected. Just because this area happens to be in the 5th Falcon Squadron, a squadron that all Indian bomber pilots don't want to touch. Those F-16C/DS with conformal fuel tanks mounted above the wings can linger in an area for long periods of time like a lingering ghost. Please be quiet. Lieutenant Colonel Makanda, the squadron leader, came in. The pilots fell silent immediately. The lieutenant colonel tore off the paper covering the mission, revealing the attack plan written in chalk. This is a combat plan code-named Severe Punishment. The aircraft of the 29th Squadron will be divided into 2 waves, using 2 routes with little change, to bomb the facilities and runways of the Pakistani 35th Transport Squadron in Lahore. Pundit, who is sitting below, knows that all these facilities are difficult to distinguish whether they are used by the Qing military or civilians. Lahore's airport has a large number of civilian flights taking off and landing every day. Guys, you must have heard the news of the upcoming war. The news is true. The Ministry of Defense has decided to launch a full-scale airstrike in the early morning of tomorrow. The lieutenant colonel said straight to the point. Contrary to everyone's expectations, in addition, everyone does not know what full airstrike means. The Indian Air Force has never demonstrated the command capability of conducting a large number of aircraft simultaneously in the air. Are many bases attacked together? Military secrets, you don't need to know, but think about it with your brains. If not, how can we take advantage of our numbers? Knocked. This is the target, the airport in Lahore, which is 200 kilometers away from us in a straight line. It is an ideal target. You can see the route. We entered from the 290 direction at a low altitude, dropped bombs, and withdrawn from the north. The targets are marked here. The navigation station, the runway, and the Pakistan 4th Army's air defense radar position on the hills to the west. The lieutenant colonel tapped his fist on a red circle on the aerial photo every time he said a target. Apart from the demarcated target, there are any IL-78, C-130 aircraft or helicopters of the Pakistan Air Force parked by the runway. What about civilian aircraft? A pilot asked. Absolutely stationary, attacking civilian airliners and any other civilian targets, such as terminals, nearby houses, mosques, etc. The squadron commander finished. Everyone nodded and pretended to be confident. In fact, everyone knew that from the night attack pod reaction to the low light image of the cockpit CRT, it was difficult to distinguish between the IL-78 and Boeing 747 10 kilometers away, and on this runway. 95% of takeoffs and landings are civilian flights. So, who is going to cover us? The first wave was covered by the 23rd Squadron, and the second wave was covered by the 1st Squadron from Gwalior, and their Mirage 2000s also took part in the ground attack mission. They will cross the border before us, suppress the anti-aircraft fire, and after we finish the attack, they will cover our retreat. The crowd began to discuss. The 1st Squadron's Mirage 2000 was reassuring, but the 23rd Squadron's equipment was backward. The MiG-21 doesn't sound very secure. Is such a cover safe? Someone asked below. Of course, this is the plan made by the Air Force staff. Lieutenant Colonel Markanda said firmly, but his wandering eyes clearly said, "How do I know? How to make sure their Falcon squadron doesn't attack us?" Pundit asked. Squadron Captain Markanda stopped, and he slowly turned from the blackboard to the pilots below. The air staff had hoped that a full-scale attack would disrupt their command. You guys remember that Lahore is very close to the border. Turn back as soon as the attack is complete, lower the altitude as much as possible, the enemy's Doppler radar will be disturbed by terrain reflections. Seeing that the pilots were unresponsive, and the lieutenant colonel didn't want to continue the spoiler, Markanda went on to the next question. Now for the details. The troops of the 4th Army. There may be an FD-2000 anti-aircraft missile position near the ministry, and I think that's the real threat. Last month, the position was near Shadra, but this month, it's not there anymore. We can get around it, acting outside his flight envelope, someone said. Unfortunately, we have not detected the location of these missiles recently, but the intelligence believes that the ground radar is likely to use the C-band or J-band after it is turned on. Your RWS may be identified as S-300, and its flight envelope is very high. Approaching the S-300. What if we get into its range? One pilot asked. I suggest you lower your altitude to avoid tracking and leave the rest to the Phantoms of Tiger, 1st Squadron. They will carry AMAT anti-radiation missiles to suppress, at least force it to shut down. I have some latest technical details. Don't try to suppress it with the jamming pod. This missile will attack the jamming source first. But, Squadron Commander, the first attack wave will not be covered by the Mirage 2000. Pundit couldn't help asking. The other pilots were also eager to hear what the squadron leader had to say about the problem. I think the suddenness of the first wave is the best protection measure. We can catch them by surprise. Lahore has not been bombed in all the conflicts since 1990. They will be paralyzed. I think God will protect every brave soldier.